You could probably have faded to black at that point, but I understand that for some people it was a big selling point of the book.
I love it. Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast, Unresolved Textual Tension. It is I, your host, Maria, and one of my co-hosts today, the ever rugged, the ever handsome, William.
Extra rugged, extra handsome.
Last weekend we recorded the For the Wolf review, which Will has already edited because he's a beast.
A wolf, you might say.
A wolf, you might say. One of the things I commented on in that book was that for me, instead of like a fairy tale retelling, it felt much more similar to Naomi Novik's Uprooted. And I explained why. And so it inspired Will and I to go ahead and read this. For me, this will be my third time reading it. Will, this is his first time. He is but a babe venturing into the uprooted world.
This actually pretty much finishes up my reading of Naomi Novik's entire bibliography. I have like 4 Tamara books I haven't read, but also I'm not going to read, so I am now fully versed in the deep lore of the Novik. And I really enjoyed this book. Like, it was so weird to just read a good book for once. Novik is such a master writer, and especially in comparison to For the Wolf, which I'll have posted the week before this and then this the following week, so go check that out in the little card things that I never put up because I'm lazy. And
Or go find it because Will was lazy.
Maybe I'll link it in the description. That's always easier to remember. This is a better book in every way, and yet it shares a bunch of plot similarities. It's about a young girl who goes to live with a mythical creature that's actually a man, the wolf, and then the dragon. In this book, there's an evil forest
that person is the warden of.
Yeah, there's like a shadow thing going on. The main guy is really grumpy, but like this book is so much better on every level that it was just probably one of the books I've enjoyed the most since we started.
It is just, like Will said, such a solid overall. Now, here's the thing. I know some people don't like this book. I've read some of the reviews. And it isn't for everyone.
What do they not like about it?
I don't remember. This was a while ago. And the thing is, like, you're allowed to. Now, I will say this book has way much more love, less dislike than Spinning Silver. As you guys know, Spinning Silver is one of my most faves. And I will maintain that it is, for me personally, my favorite. I would say this is a better book, though, holistically.
It's less ambitious in certain ways than Spinning Silver, in that this is just telling you like a good story, whereas Spinning Silver is trying to like balance a bunch of plates, and for me it didn't quite get there. But yeah, this is just such a simple like Novik telling a good story.
It is so good. And it really was a pleasure because a lot of the books we've read lately have had some sort of caveat for one of us, you know, like Mask of Mirrors, Katie enjoyed, but Will and I were kind of like, there was a lot of enjoyable things, but there were things that frustrated us. For the Wolf, there were some things I enjoyed, and then things that frustrated me, and Will was primarily frustrated.
Forest of a Thousand Lanterns.
Even Murderbot, I enjoyed for like the simplistic popcorn nature of it, but it like no profound impact on me. And then like Will did not enjoy it, so it was just really interesting reading a book and the two of us texting back and forth and being like, oh, how masterful, how like it was literally just like a love fest happening. And there are a few things that I think could have been done a bit better, and where like Will on his first read pointed out something that on my first read I thought was an issue, but on my third read I wasn't focused on, and so it wasn't as much, and we'll talk through some of that. But it is overall just a solid book. And my favorite, one of my most favorite authors on the planet is Ursula K. Le Guin, who wrote about this book before she passed away. Rip, rest in power, my goddess. The magic in Uprooted is so vividly believable that it almost seems like you could work the spells. I will talk about how there's a type of magic in this book that comes up at the end that makes life just feel, if you added some ritual, it could be a little bit more magical, but we'll get there.
There are a lot of little caveats I have like that in terms of things that I'm like, oh, this could have been done a little bit better, but also in the flow of the book, it just works so well. Like you're just entranced all the way through. Yeah, this is basically going to just be us loving on the book. I mean, I'll say all the things I think could be better, but just so overall, it's just such a good book.
It's such a good book, guys. I highly recommend reading it if this is your kind of thing. It is not delivering monster boyfriend trash, but it does have the one and only in Novik's repertoire of published fiction, because I can't speak to her fan fiction, sex scene. And guys, I loved it. I loved it. I loved it the first time I read it. I've loved it the subsequent times. This times I really paid attention to how what happens during the sex really encapsulates the characters. Will made a point that you could kind of fade to black and then like the scene wouldn't have existed, but that I loved it. He's right, but I don't give a shit.
It is by far the least painful sex scene we've read ever on this podcast. There wasn't even any weird like nipple stuff like there is with
Dan Simmons, or like, you know, he wrote one good sex scene and then followed it up with a in the middle of an action moment comparing something exploding in her head to
oh god, I was thinking of that.
Yeah, I know. So like skillfully done, Novik. Skillfully. And I would say it doesn't enter the realm of smut. Like it does the thing where you know it's happening, but it never fully says the things, and I find that a much more palatable way to describe a sex scene. But we'll get to there. Any overarching comments we want to say before we dive in?
Before we dive in, yeah, usually we have much more to say in general, but this is just like us being like, it's so good, and it is. I think in general, it's interesting. You said you noticed certain things about Novik's style as a whole that we'll go into that are kind of interesting. It very much feels like Spinning Silver in a lot of ways in terms of it shares a lot of similar kind of plot sensibilities. There's a story I started and then never finished that like feels I kind of had inspiration for again with this when I was reading this, thinking of how I would do it. And it's funny because I was like, oh, if I was Novik, I would have the villain do this and then that happen and then this is how I would expand the world. And so like it's interesting to get that Novik mode of like, this is not a sequel or a prequel to Spinning Silver, but it's very much of a kind with it, right down to like the Eastern Europeanness of it.
And the covers have a similarity to them. You definitely feel like they were written, because I think they were written back to back, and you feel like there's a sense of kinship between them. Also because they're both kind of set in Polish fantasy analog. And this one is literally Polnia with having a war with Russia. So very close. So it definitely has that flavor which you got out of Spinning Silver. And that's one of the things is I'm going to talk about some things that Naomi does, or Novik for respect, that Novik does very well, that I think people wanting to emulate those things can learn from. Number one, she's one of the most skillful first person writers we have ever dealt with on this, and each of her books that she has done first person in are doing it in different ways because of the characters, and I think that's fantastic. So the books we're talking about are Spinning Silver, which does first person for like 4 or 5 different characters,
each of which sounds distinct.
Like you can tell when it's Wanda, you can tell when it's Miriam, you can tell when it's Irina. Then there's this book, which is first person from one character's point of view, our main character Agnieszka, and then you have Deadly Education and The Last Graduate, which is also first person but sounds completely different. And each of these, the things that characters use to describe stuff, like the metaphors they're using, are so ingrained to their particular lifestyle. Will made a comment during our Spinning Silver video that for Miriam, the cherries in the syrup were like a super special occasion. Oh my God, that's amazing thing. And then there's a character, Irina, who is rich and she's grown up with them and it's not anything to like write home about. And how those characters describe things is very specific. Same here. Our main character, Agnieszka, she's a country bumpkin. She is from a tiny, small little village. She loves her village. She's a woodcutter's daughter. All of her metaphors, the way she describes things, is directly related to her life. Like, it's a lot of animals being scared of predators in the woods, or rustling of things, like of leaves. Like, you can tell where she grew up. And same with Elle from Deadly Education, where Elle's voice is sharp, a little bit acidic. She sounds like British teen. I don't want to say grungy or angsty or emo, but like the main character of a British movie, but like dark academia. It's like the teen heroine of a British dark academia show, which makes sense for who Elle is. And again, all of her descriptions and the way she like uses the narration connect deeply to what Elle cares about, what Elle finds important, and her upbringing. And it's just incredible. It really is.
It's so useful in other parts of the book because Agnieszka, who I'm probably just going to call Neshka, you really get a sense of where she's from and that she's a country bumpkin. So like at one point when she goes to the capital, there's all these things that are like new to her that she doesn't really get. Like somebody offers her a chair to go somewhere and she's like, no, I don't want a chair. I want to walk. Like I want to go to that place. And then later she figures out they're there. And like that then helps her characterization. It helps you understand why she makes certain decisions. It helps you understand how the world works. And you get such a stronger sense of atmosphere as well. Like Novik is so good at atmosphere and world building. And character. It really is masterful.
I told Will, and it might be something that we do, taking a look at a lot of the books that have used first person, and compiling the ways the ones that have really worked and kind of elevated, because a lot of first person sounds the same, sounds generic. You pick up a book and it could be any of them, and then some of them are really unique and are doing specific things, like almost like a little analysis of what works, what doesn't work, and why.
It'll start up our video essay corner with Professor Maria. You guys actually might get to see some of my cool motion graphics training. Oh yeah, so go support our Patreon if you'd like to see that in the future, because we always do that at the end of the video.
Yes, we have a Patreon. Join it. It's a good time. I promise. Pay for Will's editing habit.
And now I am actually offering my services as a fiction critiquer. I'll go through your manuscript. I'll talk about certain things. It'll probably be about 5,000 words. There's a limited amount of slots, so go check that out. Get the unmitigated Will. Don't worry, I'm much nicer in critiques than I am to random books on the internet.
He absolutely is. He's much more constructive. I don't know if our friendship would have lasted had it not been so. But definitely, I would say worth it as someone who has relied on his feedback for her own writing. Very worth it. So this story starts a way that Novik starts like all of her books that I've noticed recently, except for the first of the Temeraires. I don't remember starting it this way. I remember it starting pretty actiony out the gate. But what Spinning Silver, Deadly Education, and this book all have in common is it's just a dump of first-person information at you. And in this book, what it is it's our main character, Agnieszka, telling you, the reader, about the tradition of her valley, that there's a couple of different villages, and once every 10 years, the dragon, who is not a monster, he's just a wizard who lives in this tower, takes a girl from one of the villages, and she stays in the village, or she stays in the tower with him for 10 years, and then once she gets out, she's always changed. So beforehand, she was happy to live in the village, super good, but once the girl finishes her 10-year stint with the dragon in his tower, she doesn't want to live in the village anymore, in the valley. She leaves. He gives her a dowry. Everybody assumes he has sex with them,
which is hilarious because later he's like, really? People think that? And he's just so innocent about it.
Hysterical, but everybody assumes it. But he gives such a big dowry that she can go to the city or the capital and still marry well. And a lot of them either go to universities themselves, become teachers, marry well, and become rich little baronesses. But they're completely separated from their family. So not only do you lose your daughter when your daughter is picked by the dragon for 10 years, but she's not going to come back. There's no reuniting of the family. They even said a lot of them will just send money to their nieces and nephews who still live in the valley.
It's surprising because the thing about this opening, and Maria said it, is that it's so weird that Novik gets away with just info dumping, and somehow it's really engaging, and you're interested in what happens next. And it's funny because one of the things I said about YA that I've noticed as a pattern is it starts on an action scene, and then halfway through the action scene, the character stops for about 3 pages to explain the evil empire. And it's so annoying. But here, she doesn't even start with action. She just she just keeps telling you stuff about the world, and it's really interesting.
The reason I think it works is because in all three instances, Deadly Education, Spinning Silver, and Uprooted, it is told to you as if a tale, like a story is being told to you like a grand tale, an epic, like storyteller around the fire. And I'm just going to like give you a little baby flavor for it because it feels like she's talking to you. Our dragon doesn't eat the girls he takes, no matter what the stories they tell outside our valley. We hear them sometimes from travelers passing through. They talk as though we were doing human sacrifice, and he were a real dragon. Of course that's not true. He may be a wizard and immortal, but he's still a man, and our fathers would band together and kill him if he wanted to eat one of us every 10 years. He protects us against the wood, and we are grateful, but not that grateful. And that's the tone.
It's a great hook to start with, and then it keeps going. And here's the thing. She weaves in the character so that you have a very strong sense of the character by the end. You have a very strong sense of the world, too. And that's one of the things that Novik is so good at world building, even in, like, relatively normal settings. Like, she's not breaking down how dragons would, change cultures or whatever, like she was in the Tamara series, like, really masterfully. Here it's just, like, slightly different Poland, but it's still really engaging and cool. And one of the things I mentioned in Spinning Silver is that the way she world builds even different people's classes is really interesting, like the little gritty of it. And she erects a societal environment very quickly and well. So we're going to be, or at least I am going to be referencing For the Wolf a lot. And I didn't hate that book, but that book is just so amateurish compared to this one. And it has so many elements that are the same that I just kind of have to go back and forth. And also, I'm still salty about the wolf not actually being a wolf.
And yet less salty that the dragon is not a dragon here.
Well, yes, but that's because he's a really good character, which we'll talk about.
He is such a good character.
He's also much funnier if you I told Maria, if you actually imagine him as a dragon who's stuck in human form and he's just like fussy and annoyed about everything.
He's so great.
But like in For the Wolf, you never had a strong sense of the society, and especially in court, you really did not have a strong sense of what was going on there at all, like what the different power plays are, what the Moors, or not the Moors, the Morays, the Moray eels were, and so it hurt the atmosphere and the characters in the book as a whole. Whereas in this one, within the first 2 pages, you have the texture of Agnieszka's village and the world and how they think, and you also already begin to realize that she's kind of a country bumpkin, and that's how she thinks about things.
And she's also one of the most, I don't want to say bumpkiniest of the country bumpkins, but like Agnieszka specifically it's impossible for her to stay clean. And one of the things you learn very quickly is her mom was always okay with that because she is obviously at the start born in a dragon year, because they talk about if your daughter was a dragon born, which is born in the year period where the next choosing will take place. And Agnieszka and her best friend Kasia were born in a dragon year. But he always picks the prettiest, the most well-spoken, the one who can sing the best. Like, he always picks, like, an exceptional girl. And Agnieszka is exceptional at getting dirty and messy. Like, she can't keep clean for her life. And there's actually a really great moment later where she has a conversation with someone who's like, yeah, I literally saw a branch try get you. Like, it reached out. And her mother is like, oh, phew. My daughter's a fucking mess. The dragon's not going to pick her.
It's definitely going to be this other girl called Kasia, who's super beautiful, and who, actually, Agnieszka likes. Like, Agnieszka is kind of her friend even, or they're fond of each other, I thought, even if they're not necessarily close friends.
They're best friends.
I never really got the sense that they were, like, friends. We'll talk about it more, but
I would argue that the book shows that they're very close. What I would argue that it does not show is who Kasia is within herself.
Yes, that makes sense.
Everyone thinks Kasia is going to be chosen because she's pretty, she knows how to cook, she's very well spoken, she's brave, she's braver than Agnieszka. Coming up to the choosing, which is like a whole ass thing, Agnieszka tries really hard not to be dirty, specifically because she wants Kasia to know that she's gonna do the best so that she'd get, like, because sometimes girls will appear grosser or less put together in the hopes of not getting chosen, but she was not going to do that to Kasia. She was going to show up looking the best that she could to give Kasia a chance. And they get there and the dragon just poofs out of air and is like, okay, where are the girls? Let's get this done. And everybody was like, there's no ceremony. Nope. And he's like, he's just looking at them. He gets to Kasia. He smiles. He's like, yes, this is the one. And then he gets to Agnieszka, and he immediately gets, like, an annoyed look on his face. And then he moves on. he looks at some other people. He goes back to Kasia, but then he looks at Agnieszka and he's like, God damn it. And he makes a little like white ball of flame in his hand and he tells Agnieszka, take it. And she's like, what? And then she takes it. She has the little white ball and his hands were very hot and she's holding it. And he was like, I guess that means I have to take you. Come on, let's go. And she doesn't even have a chance to say goodbye to her family. He literally is like, okay, I've chosen you. And then he whisks her.
They apparate, essentially.
So her family's left reeling. She's left reeling. Kasha's like, what? And she ends up in the castle. One of the other things to say about this book, because we're about to enter one of what I would call the episodes, is this book is very episodic. Will mentioned this, and I completely agree. There are a bunch of like little mini episodic arcs that happen within this story. I normally have issues with that because a lot of times when you have books with multiple arcs, there is a loss of tension at the end of one arc, especially if there's a climax in it, leading into the next one, and then you have to rebuild that tension. One of the other masterful things that Novik does within this book, ain't no tension lost never. She just keeps building it and it just gets creepier and weirder and creepier and you're like, what is happening?
I think part of what helps is that each of them is like a causal link to the next episode. So it feels a little episodic, but it actually, because that kind of puzzled me while I was reading it, because I'm like, it feels episodic, but it technically isn't because each of the things is leading into the next. So I think she kind of gets like a hybrid strength from that in terms of the structure of the book. And it also helps, I think, because the book starts with kind of a slice of life feel, and so you're like, oh, okay, I'm expecting something a little episodic in that way. And so then when that's what you get, it's not really an issue.
One thing that I didn't mention is the reason the dragon, I need to explain this really quick. The valley that they live is very beautiful. It has this beautiful river called the Spindle flowing through it, but on the one side of it is the wood. And these woods are hella not great. And there's forests, but then there is specifically the wood. And they're two distinct things. Forested land, fine. The wood, bad. Stay out. And what it is that the wood is just this malevolent force. This and the way Will described it earlier, like especially at the beginning, this eldritch horror, you're not sure what's happening. It will sometimes reach out in different ways to take bits of the valley and try reclaim it.
And like twist animals and people into being violent and like crazy.
It'll catch people and bring them in, and you either think the person has died or later the person shows up again looking exactly like themselves until they convince you to stab yourself because they've been corrupted. There is a corruption deep in these woods and it can affect other people, and that corruption can spread like a disease, and it can send out spores that can corrupt crops or animals. It can steal people. It has these big twiggy things called walkers that can snatch you up and take you into the woods, and nobody's really sure what happens when you're in the woods. But they know if you come out fucked up. And even if the person looks fine and sounds fine, it is not okay. And the dragon's entire purpose of living in his tower in this valley is to protect the valley from the woods, because the woods is one of the biggest threats to this nation of Polnia. It also backs up onto Rosja on the other side, and so they also have issues with it, but it is just this looming presence in the book. At the start.
The other thing to mention is that the wood is slowly creeping outward. Like even with like, the dragon and everything, like it's going to consume the world at some point, which I thought was so creepy.
It's so good. I love it. And the reason it works is because I would compare it to what the evil dragon in Priory of the Orange Tree should have felt like.
I read 3/4 of that book and I didn't even meet that character, so
but
that's Priory of the Orange Tree for you.
But even in the way it was spoken about before it ever appears, because it takes you a minute to actually get into the woods, and once you're in the woods, it takes you a while to meet the evil thing in the woods. The way it is spoken about, the way Novik spins this story of the woods, it's so fucking creepy. And the giant dragon monster in Priory of the Orange Tree could have used a little bit of this eldritch horrorness, It was literally a giant dragon from the bowels of the earth that everyone was terrified of, and you really just didn't feel it. Like, it didn't have the same oomph.
You know what also didn't have it? For the Wolf's, like, Shadow Forest thing.
It didn't! At all.
And for the wolf, she does describe it like creepy, but it doesn't feel creepy. And also, its presence in the book, this shadow world, doesn't feel interesting or creepy, or like you don't get that sense of dread with the forest. Like at a point, I was like, oh shit, it's gonna consume everything, and like you get that existential horror. And instead, they just do this stupid like throwing your blood on it thing that just is very silly.
He's really right. The woods and for the wolf. Number one, they tried to play this that the woods themselves weren't bad, but that they were protecting the world from this shadow realm. And in this, the woods are like whatever this dark presence is, it is within these woods. The trees themselves are distorted, and also I think one of the things is in for the wolf, when the shadows came, it just became like a giant hole in the ground. Like the trees were the creepiest part were the upside down trees in the shrine
Yeah, no, for sure. It's basically a portal to get enemy mobs in a video game.
versus this book where when you see like the heart trees of the woods, they are
There's such a
distorted.
wonderful description at the end of the book of the first guy who was integrated into a heart tree, and it describes like his fingers turning into the, like branches and going out, and he's screaming, and his toes and his like blood vessels, and it was just so cool.
And this book slaps you in the face with eventually Agnieszka's going to go in the woods to try save someone, and when you see what has happened to someone, there's this moment of just absolute horror because you didn't know, but you almost go in thinking it'll be like a monster or something's eating her or something, and it's so much more sinister than that. We'll get there. I'm getting distracted. So she's in the tower and she's terrified because all she's ever heard of the dragon has been, like not great stuff. He's also like a dick. um and her first few interactions with him, so he drops her off in like on a landing. She throws up because of the magic to apparate here. He's like, oh, disgusting, clean that up. She uses her skirt, and then she sees a note. Like she ends up finding the kitchens. She sees a note that says, if you put his food in for him 5 minutes before the hour, you won't have to see him, and you can go days without seeing him. And she's really thankful. Number one, it's a note from one of these other valley girls who were there before, and she feels like this almost warmth, kindness from the previous girls leaving notes for the next ones, like this nice little like heritage of help. And so she tries that, and she does her best. She makes a little like baked apple. She makes a little rabbit stew. She brings it to him, but then she gets lost. By the time she finds him, it's all coagulated. And so he does this thing where he makes her say something. It causes the food to suddenly become yummy and delicious, but she feels drained. Like she's just done. I need to go sleep now. And what you discover, and what she doesn't know for a very long time, is that magic. She has magic. Sorry, I accidentally banged on my desk. You're going to hear that later. He is trying to teach her without telling her. He does this thing. The dragon's a dick. He looks at her and he's like, "You impetuous fool, you dullard!" Like, and he just like he insults her all the time. And what you realize is the dragon spends most of his time isolated. He doesn't interact with the people, and he just no longer knows how to interact with other humans. He's so used to his own way, his own perfect little. And you learn that he is a perfectionist. So everything he does, he likes just fucking so. And as I mentioned before, Agnieszka's a fucking mess.
It's interesting because, comparison with For the Wolf number 2, 3, or 4 or 5, I don't know where we're at now. But it's interesting that he is more likable than Amon in that book, the main character who was not a wolf, by virtue of being less likable. Because he is a dick truly to Agnieszka, and like they really don't like each other at first, and he is actually mean, but by not watering it down, he feels more like a real person. So you start feeling like, oh, this is actually kind of funny, and also I kind of get who he is.
Yeah.
And he also, like Maria hasn't mentioned, but he's very fussy. He likes his appearance, he likes to be nice, he likes things clean, and you do get a sense that like, oh yeah, he just does not know how to interact with people after so much time. And Agnieszka is also a great character because she really feels like a 17-year-old country bumpkin in a way that like she's kind of afraid and she kind of does weird things at times, and she doesn't know how to handle situations, so she just runs away. And she doesn't know how to handle him, so she just runs away at times.
And then she'll also have times where she loses her temper and she'll just like yell and stamp her foot, and then afterwards she'll be like, "Oh my god," runs away.
It's great. It's almost like a little bit like an anime at times at those. And the thing is, she is that kind of character archetype that Red was in for the Wolf, but like actually written in a good way. She's like she's tempestuous without being annoyingly sassy. Like the author doesn't give her like cool comebacks or funny witticisms. She's just kind of awkward and like fights when she argues with him. She argues with him out of like real emotion. It's so much better done than every other book we've read, which has had this kind of dynamic between the characters.
I love it. But anyway, like I said, she is magic. And the reason he took her, and again, she doesn't know this at this point. As the reader, begin to start putting this together because she goes, "Why does he keep using me to cast magic? It's like I'm a battery for him. I don't like it. I feel shit afterwards." And eventually, she like gets so mad at him one day. She's like, "Why are you doing this? Why are you making me?" And he's like, "You're doing it. Like, you didn't." And she's like, "No, of course I didn't." And you can just tell that he just expects people to know things and understand things. And she's literally like,
so lost.
so lost. And then he's like, "Oh, okay. There was no explanation for that." And so eventually she learns that yes, he is trying to teach her magic. He's not using her for his magic. He is trying to teach her magic. And what he said is, it is his obligation as a wizard, if you find someone with magical abilities, to train them, especially this close to the woods. Because one of the things he mentions to Agnieszka is that the wood would love to eat a nice little juicy baby witch. It would love that. It would use her powers to cause massive chaos. So he, even though he did not want to take Agnieszka, literally had to, because he had to train her so that she could fight against the wood and was away from it and protected, much to his dismay. And so they eventually like get into a rhythm where she like cooks, but she won't use a lot of the magic he's taught her, which are cantrips, really basic, easy spells that should just make life easier, but they exhaust her. Eventually she's able to build up enough of stamina that she's not super exhausted, but it's still very draining. And then one day, this guy, Prince Marek, comes into town to visit the dragon. And she knows of Prince Marek. Troubadours, bards come into town a lot, and they would sing songs of the youngest prince of Polnia, Prince Marek, who was like hero level. He killed a chimera. He fights the Russians, like the whole 9 yards. He comes in, and Sarkin, that's the dragon's name, Sarkin hides Agnieszka, and she's like, "Are you hiding me?" And he's like, "Yes, stay in your room. Don't come out." And she's like, "Okay." So she's doing her best to like stay out of the way, and then she comes back the first night that Marek is staying with the dragon, and he's in her bedroom, and she's like, "What's happening?" And then he starts trying to get down with her, and she's like, "Oh no."
Can I just say that the way that Novik writes this scene is really, really nuanced and good. So, okay, here's the thing that we'll talk about a little bit more later, but you get, because Agnieszka has been set up as this kind of country bumpkin, that she doesn't really quite know what's going on with herself and her body all this time. And so she doesn't really understand like the consent portion of this. So she's kind of like, okay, I actually kind of would have been into this, but I'm not. And I kind
Had
of
he
feel,
asked?
had he asked, like,
Had
I'm
he
not
asked?
into it. And like, and now as soon as he's like not stopping, now I'm beginning to not get okay with it. And like, it's such a realistic way of depicting it.
Also, at this point, she still doesn't know she's magic. She thinks the dragon is just using her. Marek is like trying to make moves and trying to take her clothing off, and she's like, she can't get him off. He's too strong, and she's panicking. So she says a word that the dragon has been making her say a lot, which is vanastalem. And it is what he says to her when she's really dirty, and he wants her to look nice. And it makes whatever she's wearing into like a corseted silk gown with a headdress, and she feels it's tight, it's uncomfortable, it's a lot of layers, and she's supposed to be doing like mild housework, and she hates it. So much so that she has one dress left that's a linen homespun from her family, and she specifically saves that, and she's taken to just wrapping up the old dresses around her, even if she can't fully put them back on. So when she gets dirty, she can just vanastalem herself and it'll be a new dress. But anyway, she says it, and all of a sudden, her nice homespun dress that or like night shift that he was about to take off turns into a corseted layer upon like extra detailed, so it's impossible. Like she's caged herself. And two things: hysterical because he's like, what the fuck, you're a witch. Also, she's like, what the fuck, I did that. He wasn't here. Oh my god, did I just do magic?
Side tangent, just because I'm a history nerd and I found this funny. In real life, those huge hoop skirts and stuff, men complained about them constantly because they took up too much space. But one of the things they were kind of good for was like an anti-groping tool, or like a way for women to control the space around them. So it's not just a frivolous fashion choice. It is actually a way for women to control things. And I always just thought that was like a fascinating way of looking at it. And
Absolutely.
so here it has a very practical application.
And I love it because it's literally her using this thing that she generally hates to defend herself. Fantastic. We love to see it. He's like, "Oh shit, you're a witch." And she had a tray with her dinner on it that she was coming to eat in her room by herself, and she takes it. She just starts bashing him over the head with it. Like he passes out and she's still going. And then the dragon comes and it's like, "What the fuck?" It's literally her in this insanely ornate gown bashing one of the princes of Polonia's head in, and he's like, okay, I'm going to assume, because she explains herself, and he was like, everything you have said checks out. It makes sense that Marek would do that. You're being dumb, though. We can't kill him. So they have to heal him, and he gets a potion, gives it to him, says a spell. They're like, okay, now what do we do with the whole, you nearly tried to kill him, and he remembers you trying to kill him. So they craft a plan that they will let him think, like the dragon will put a memory in his head because he can't get rid of it, but he can replace it with a different memory, that they had a lovely night, that she was a very willing and happy partner, if anything a little innocent and bad at sex, but willing. And she's like, really, should we do that? And he was like, yeah, I don't care, because he explains
He's
he
such a funny character.
yeah, he is. He explains that the reason Marek is doing this is because Marek assumes that the dragon, Sarkhan, sleeps with the girls, and this is a way to cuckold him, which Sarkhan thinks is ridiculous because why would he ever sleep with any of them?
I read Sarkhan as a little asexual or demisexual technically because he's
Yes.
into stuff later, but like that's how I read him a little bit, is like he's just not super like that's not a big part of his personality.
100%. I completely agree. He's so shocked every time somebody assumes it.
Yeah, that's what it is like he just his mind doesn't really go there.
Why would I do that? Like, what are you talking about? Anyway, so they craft this plan, and this is the point where she confronts him, and she's like, yo, I did magic. And he's like, yeah, you would do magic. You're a fucking witch. I'm training you, so you're not such a dumb witch. And she's like, oh, okay. So Marek leaves, and as he leaves, he, like, blows a kiss up at her window, and she's like, ew, no thanks. He fucks off.
And Marek is honestly not because of this scene. Marek is like one of my not favorite. He's such a good character. He is a really well sketched character on Novik's part, and I really liked the layers with him. In general, all of the characters in this book have really nice layers to them, and like right and wrong things, and the author doesn't necessarily come, I mean in this case she does, but the author doesn't necessarily come down too heavily on their views and like tipping the scales of who's right or who's wrong. There's like good back and forths.
And even in this, Agnieszka notes that he is not used to be told no, and most of the time women are really willing, and Agnieszka is like, yeah, had he asked, I probably, yeah, he's very attractive. And he just is not reading the room. And Agnieszka at this point is also very quiet and isn't speaking.
Also, this works because of what Novik has done in terms of setting up the world is actually somewhat plausibly medieval. This is one thing I mentioned in The Bear and the Nightingale, which is that at one point, the main character's father kind of does a thing that rhymes with grape in a marital sense, but like none of the characters involved have the modern structure to really understand consent
Why?
why or really even consent. Like he doesn't understand it and his wife doesn't really understand it, but it works because that book has such a good sense of this is the time and place, and so these are the characters within it, and this only really works because of the same reason.
Marek leaves. Agnieszka's like, thanks, I don't need that interaction again. But then a while later, after she's been training more with the dragon, and at this point she's getting more like capable of handling more than one spell at a time, she also learns, because he says at one point, she's like, I hate these dresses. How do I make it more usable? And he goes, slur it. Like, don't say this spell perfectly. Like, fuck it up. See what happens. And she does. And she ends up with a nice homespun dress, which she's very happy with. And she's like, perfect.
This is one of those things where it's like, conceptually, I should dislike this magic system because it's not mystic, it's not strange or hard to understand. It's like very formalized in like almost a Harry Potter way, but it just works really good for the story, and I don't necessarily understand why. And even some of the stuff that happens later still sounds atmospheric.
Do you want to know why it works for you? Because there is a mystic, ununderstood magic that is happening. Your quota of the mysticism is being met, I think. I think the wood provides an ununderstood, doesn't make sense by anyone else's. And so I think the inclusion of a very structured magic system, and then even Agnieszka and how the way she does magic, which I'm going to refer to as intuitive magic, I think fits in a little bit. And by having both and then having the wood and the woods magic, I think it fulfills, like, there's such a stark contrast between the way Sarkhan and everyone else does magic and the way Agnieszka does it, that you feel like you're getting kind of like the best of both.
I think that's true. I think also just the tone of the book. It's kind of like the magic system in Deadly Education is very similar, but like that book works because like that's just the tone of the magic it's going for.
Mm-hmm.
And in this one, you know, it's very funny. I kind of picture this whole book as an anime, and so like the whole thing kind of works for me in that way. Like I haven't read or watched Howl's. I read Howl's Moving Castle. I haven't watched Howl's Moving Castle, but that's kind of like a bit of what I imagine it looking like the Sesame Street creator that Maria really likes. What's the producer? He's very famous.
I'm not giving this to you.
The one with the Totoro.
Yep.
Um,
You can struggle. I'm not engaging. So her and Sarkhan back to their regular day-to-day life, and then a rider comes from the Yellow Marshes, which is a area of Polnia that a baron serves that is close with Sarkhan, like knows Sarkhan. And basically the rider comes and says, there was a chimera, we need you to help kill it. And Sarkhan at first is like, was there actually a chimera? What did it look like? And he's like, I saw it. This is what it looked like. The baron sent me so I could tell you. And he's like, God damn it, it sounds like a chimera. And then he looks at Agnieszka and he was like, don't do anything. Also, I have to mention something really quick. There was a period where Agnieszka got bored and tried reading a book, and it turned out to be a magic book, and it made Sarkhan think she was a spy coming to sneak through his library and find out information. Hysterical chase scene ensues, and she ends up knocking into a potion that turns her to stone. She still has a sense of consciousness while she is stone, but it's kind of like a weightless, timeless, in-between existence while she's stone. You'll see why I mentioned that. The rider comes and is like, we need your Sarkhan. He goes and he's like, don't touch anything, don't do anything, stay inside, stay out of the room of potions, just like try not to do anything chaotic, you little chaos demon. And Agnieszka's like, yeah, that sounds good. And she's kind of like, woo, I get a break from him. But then she's also like, it's kind of lonely, literally completely by myself. And then she sees like the night he's gone. And so he's already like, or maybe 2 days later, but enough time that he is in the Yellow Marshes now, which is a couple days ride. She sees the fires go up, the beacons for help go up, leading back to her village of Dvernik. And she's like, oh shit, the dragon's not here. They're waiting. The wood must have attacked. They're waiting. They need help. And she's like, oh fuck, it's just me. What do I do? And then she realizes that while she is not at all qualified or capable to be able to help with anything serious, she has at least some magic, which is more than anyone else in that fucking valley has. And so she's like, it's me, I gotta do it. So she goes to his potions room. She grabs Fireheart, which is a little vial of happy
napalm.
Yeah, it's literally like this little fire spirit in a bottle that's like, I want to eat, it gets described as happily like doing stuff all the time. I love it. I have such a specific image. That's one of those Studio Ghibli moments that like you can see the tongue of the fire coming out of the fire heart being like, oh, yum, nom, nom, nom.
You know, their TV series recently got taken off of HBO.
Which TV series?
Sesame Street. You walked into that one. You walked into it, and it was glorious.
Anyway, she takes one that he told her would make plants grow, and then she takes the gray potion, which is the rock potion, the stone potion, because at least she knows what those three does. She has no idea what the rest of them do, so she takes the three. One burns shit, one makes shit grow, and one makes things stone. She doesn't know if they are at all applicable to what she's about to have to go do, but she doesn't. So she like gets her way down. She starts going down the road. Eventually, she gets to the village that is closest to the tower. And then what appears to be a boy comes running down the road, except it's not a boy, it's Kasia, dressed as a boy, coming to try find help because Kasia's a badass bitch. So they get in and they're like, Agnieszka, Kasia, and they're having a nice little reunion, but shit's gone terrible. And what Agnieszka learns is some wolves came out of the woods and bit some cattle, and they specifically bit the cattle of this poor farmer named Jerzy. And Agnieszka is immediately sad because Jerzy had just gotten enough money to buy his third cow, which would help take his family out of poverty because they've been, like, for years now, his wife Christina could not have a baby and has had multiple miscarriages. Her family would give to Jerzy's family to help them. And Christina's finally, like, near full term of a baby. Like, she's finally pregnant. She's carrying one through. And so this is like the worst thing that could happen to them.
He should have killed the infected cows earlier, but like he's like,
Yeah, but he's like, I can't. These are my livelihood. So he doesn't. And then they bite him. And then it spreads to all the cattle. So Jerzy is corrupted now. All the cattle in the village are corrupted. This is going to be a rough year for the village of Dvernach. She gets there, and they've taken all of the corrupted cattle and corralled them into one giant pen. And the strongest people of the village are sitting there with pitchforks and like spears trying to hold the cows back as they keep trying to ram themselves into the pen to break it down. And they're these giant, bloated, grotesque cows. They have horns that are pointing in different directions. Like, it's just gruesome. And so Agnieszka immediately is like, okay, of what I have, the only thing we can do is burn them. The village had tried to burn the cows, but they kept stamping out any of the kindling, and it's like the middle of winter, so everything or no, it wasn't the middle of winter. Things are damp, so things aren't catching very quickly. So Agnieszka's like, I got fire heart. Let's douse these motherfuckers. So they start building a fire break. She goes to see her family, and at first they're like, maybe don't see your family. Like, maybe just let somebody else go talk to them. It'll hurt less later. And she's like, no. I want to go see them. And her mother like sobs, her brothers and her dad sobs. It's fantastic. She takes some of the fire heart and pours like the littlest drop, but it tries to like catch her like hands, like it erupts and she has to stop it back up, but her hands get a little burnt. She throws it in and the fire heart just starts gladly eating up the cows. The cows are burning, everything's going down, and she's like, oh man, phew, we did it. We did the thing. But then there's Jerzy, who is corrupted as well, and he's being held in his house. So they finish up with the cows. Well, they don't finish. The cows continue burning for a while other people are like stabbing them to keep them, because now that they're burning, they're really trying to get out, but they can't, because if they get out, then the fire heart gets out and the fire heart will like burn everything down. Not great. So they go into Jerzy's house, and Christina is just like, poor Christina. We feel for Christina. And Jerzy is tied down onto their bed, and he is just green. His fingernails are black. His face is just contorted in these terrible grimaces, and he's like speaking. He's like, oh, hello, little witch. Hello, Neshka. And it knows, and she sees staring out of Jerzy's eyes, something else is staring at her. It's not Jerzy. There is something looking out from Jerzy's eyes. This dark, sinister force is looking out, and she's like, oh no, that sucks. And Christina expects when they come that they're going to kill and burn Jerzy, but Kasia is like, do you think you can help? She realizes no, she can't. She has no idea. She tried the healing, the little thing she got of healing stuff she tried, and it's a great scene here because she brings the healing potion with her, and she knows the little spell he used on Prince Marek, that Sarkin used on Prince Marek, and so she tries it, but she's too afraid to get close enough to pour it into his mouth. So Kasia takes it. She puts on like the big gloves that you use around the fire. She uses a poker to hold his neck down, and then in her gloved hand pours the thing in so that she won't, like, Kasia is brave, and Kasia like gets shit done. She's a very practical lady. I love her. I wish you get a little bit more of her, but I like these moments because I didn't pick up on them the first time I read it, but there's a lot of moments from the beginning where you see Kasia is very brave and she's willing to do shit. So she gets it in. Agnieszka does the like spell, and it like starts healing up some of his wounds, but it doesn't at all touch the corruption. And she's like, I know we should burn this man. We literally should take him, throw him into the fire and burn him. But she can't bring herself to do it. So what she does instead is she takes the stone spell and she douses him in it so he turns to stone. And she thinks, well, the dragon's not here now, but he'll be back eventually, and maybe he'll be able to help Yerzy. So everything seems good. Her and Kasia go to sit down. They look, and out of the woods come loping a pack of giant wolves. And Agnieszka's like, oh no. And they're not just like coming out sniffing for stuff. They are hunting, and they're looking for her. Like Sarkhan told her, the woods would like nothing more than get their hands on her nice, juicy, young witch blood. And they've come for her. These wolves have come for her. So her and Kasia are like, oh, she tells Kasia, run. And Kasia like just takes her and bodily drags her along. She throws the last of the stone spell, hits a couple of the wolves. They turn into stone. One kind of half turns into stone. Sucks for that guy. She uses the plant spell, and it like roots come and like grab one of the wolves, and then also like a bunch of crops grow. So that'll be helpful next year. But then it's her and Kasia in like the barn, in Yerzy's barn, like empty. There's a wolf like jumps in from like this window that they didn't think about. And she's like, oh shit, here's where I die. And then door busts open and Sarkhan's there. And he's like, what the fuck did you do, Agnieszka? Like immediately just mad.
Do you know how much that fire stuff costs?
And he like deals with the wolves. He's yelling at her, but then another wolf, Kasia, yells. Another wolf has jumped out, and it scratches Sarkhan. He looks at her and he's like, you need to take me back to the tower. And he tells her the spell to take them. They get whisked back to the tower, and he's literally holding his arm to keep the corruption from spreading, but she can see it's already started rooting and it's starting to spread. And she's like, oh shit, what do I do? He passes out, which is super not helpful because she doesn't know how the fuck to fix this. So she goes to the library and she's like, I need a book to help. And she just kind of stumbles upon, is kind of called to a little tiny leather book with a ton of sticky notes, the equivalent of sticky notes sticking out. And she thinks because there's like, it's someone else's handwriting and a bunch of Sarkhan's handwriting making notes. She thinks, oh, if he spent this much time making notes in it, it has to be important. And she finds a spell for taking out rot or bad things. And it's not specifically for corruption, but she's like, I'll try it. And she has to take lemon peels and some rosemary. She boils it. And the spell is very brief. It basically says, hack with some lemon and rosemary. Say this thing to whatever rhythm feels pleasing. And she's like, okay, fuck it. So she does it. She starts like saying the words to the rhythm of an old story song that she knows. And she just says it. And it says to like, put your breath on it. So she's like breathing on his arm, and it works. Next thing he knows, he wakes up, he's fine, and he's like, what the fuck? And then this is the point where he yells at her about how expensive the fire heart is because she wasted like half a bottle.
Well, and what he does is he's like, okay, do you think the wood didn't know that you were going to do that? It lured us out with the chimera over that in the yellow marshes, and then it attacked the village so that I would have to come back, and it would love to get its hands on a mage. So it's like, that's the thing about the wood in this book, is it's so cunning and it always has plans going on.
And it is immediately not just a eldritch force, but an intelligent eldritch force that is like plans, wheels within wheels, plans within plans, baby. The wood is one of the best forward mover in a novel we've read in a very long time. Like him, the Woods, and Baron Harkonnen.
It may be the best villain we've read.
Absolutely. Like, the plan is so beautiful. Especially on a reread, you really get to appreciate how it all builds on itself. But anyway, eventually he's like, what did you do to get the stuff out of my arm? And she's like, oh, I used this book. And he gets angry. And it's great because he always gets angry before, like, actually saying why he's angry. He's just really fucking pissed. And basically what it is the book she found was written by Baba Yaga. And it has a bunch of spells in it that he has never, ever been able to make work correctly. All the spells that he uses, very similar to the spells in Harry Potter, have distinct, like if you're making a potion, if you're doing something, there's distinct measurements, there's a preciseness to what you're supposed to say, an exacting nature to the spell work. Baba Yagas are like, whatever feels right, like maybe you don't have this thing, but you can use this other thing, that's fine. Like, you do you, Pikachu, whatever feels right. copyright. We're free here. And he hates it. He hates that goddamn book. He spent a ton of money trying to get it. It has never worked for him. And there's Agnieszka, who made a spell work.
Well, and he likes things orderly and in their place. And so this whole idea of like just saying the thing, he's like, no, I don't like it.
So he makes Agnieszka kind of walk him through what she did. He writes down exactly what she says, exactly what she does, and then he tries to do it and it doesn't work. And then she says, "No, you shouldn't say that word there." And he goes, "But you said it." And she goes, "Yes, but it was right then, but it is not right when you do it." And basically what she tries to explain to him is that when she does these spells, it's like there's paths in the wood, and it's like somebody telling you how to get to a specific place in the wood. Stuff always changes. A branch falls through a path. There's a general direction, but each time you do it, it's going to be a little bit different. So you're going to have to walk around this rock or go over this thing, but next time those things might not be there. A crow might have flown through your path. But that's not how magic works for him, so he's really angry. And then he decides, okay, it worked because you have an affinity for healing. That's what it is. That's why you suck at all the other spells. Your affinity is healing, will do healing magic. But those don't work. All the spells that work his way don't work for Agnieszka. And then he was like, he's getting frustrated. And she's like, well, I've done like 4 spells from Yaga's book, and they've all worked for me. And he's like, what do you mean? And he's just so angry. It's great. And basically what they learn is that she just does, like I mentioned before, a different type of magic, this intuitive magic. She does entire spells where sometimes she's not even saying the words, she's just humming. And as long as she gets the idea of what she's supposed to be doing, or she can feed her magic the concept that it needs to do, she can make it happen. And there are times towards the end of the book where she's not even using spells. She's just assembling things and like feeding magic into it.
Or just singing a note.
They begin to explore how the magic, because once he realizes this, he begins to find all the other spell books he had that didn't work for him and give it to her so she can try. And she says that as once they made this realization, he was just as exacting of a teacher, but within her limits. So she'd do a spell and he'd say, what was supposed to happen? Like, what did you want to happen? And if it wasn't what happened, he would make her do it over and over again until she was able to adequately predict the outcome of her spell. He's not able to do it, but he's kind of like, it's like when you have football trainers that know like how the game works, but they probably couldn't run as much as you do.
No, you got to do it right. He's like, no, we're going to do this.
If you're going to do this, you're going to do it the most rightest way within your way of working. And it's really interesting, and I love this portion of the book. It quickly comes to, where they do magic together the first time during this part, or is it later?
No, I think it is during this part of the book. Yeah, because they do a spell together, and this is like, okay, this is a part and a thing that the book handles really well. I've talked before about how I hate fever touch, which is when 2 protagonists are like, I just liked him, but I felt a feeling in my body, I didn't know what, or like, oh, our hands brushed and shivers ran through me. And I hate it because that should be built organically through the character interaction so that you as the reader mimic that feeling, not just like, oh, I have a weird fever and it happens whenever this character is around. And at this point, when they do magic, Agnieszka feels like a weird kind of like warmth or closeness to him. But here it works. First of all, because before this, there has been no fever touch and no romantic anything going on. The author has held back, so you're more in that spot. Also, the magic is going on, so that's a little bit more understandable. And then also, the thing that kind of works about it is that Agnieszka is a country bumpkin and she's not very aware of herself. And so it makes sense that she doesn't quite know what's going on with herself all of the time. Whereas if we go back to Red and for the Wolf, like she'd been having sex all the time and she was like an older character. She was like 20. Whereas Agnieszka is like 17. She hasn't messed around with boys. It makes sense that she doesn't really understand her own feelings on this.
It is very intimate because what you discover is that people very rarely do magic together, and the way her magic works and how it works, even though this isn't when this happens, I will tell it and we'll cut it in when it is appropriate. He asks her to make the illusion of a flower, And then he kind of takes a spell he knows that does the same thing and kind of builds it around until they're able to match their flowers so perfectly that they become one flower. And then suddenly their working has become one working that they're both doing together. And there's even a part where he is able to completely offload the entire working on her. She's able to keep it, even though she doesn't know what his actual spell is. She is able to, through this sharing of magic, keep the spell going as long as she keeps up her side of it. And then he starts making these cute little bees. And it's very like intimate and adorable. But the sharing of magic, because she literally feels his magic, and she also feels the joy he gets from casting magic. That exacting preciseness comes from wanting to do things as well as he can, and not just actually because he's a dick. So it's a fantastic scene. They eventually kiss at the end of this, but we'll get there because this is not where this happens. The next thing that actually happens after this point is like 3 days later, after she heals him and he starts teaching her, like they start actually working on magic that is for her and works for her. Like a week or so later, Wensa and someone comes to the tower, and Wensa is Kasia's mother. And immediately Agnieszka knows that something is wrong if Wensa has come, because normally if somebody was going to be sent, it would be Kasia. So she knows something is wrong, and it has to do something is wrong specifically with Kasia. When she speaks to Wensa, Wensa tells her that some walkers came out of the woods, grabbed Kasia, and took her in. And she's in the woods, and please help. Please help Agnieszka. And Agnieszka's like, oh fuck, it's my best friend. And the dragon comes and he's like, nope, nothing to be done. She's dead. And he gives Wensa a draft to help her sleep. And he's like, I'm sorry about your friend. I know you guys were close, but sucks to suck. He goes off, and Agnieszka just takes her book, Baba Yaga's book, puts it in her pocket, grabs her little satchel, and just walks out. And she previously had been unable to open his doors, his massive magic doors. And at this point, she like threw them open with her own magic, and they were open before. And she just walks out. She gets into the little cart that Wensa came with. She tells the guy, "Take me to the woods, please." And he, not knowing any better, is just like, "Yeah, sure, that sounds appropriate." And this girl just goes off to go in the woods by herself. And this is a vastly stupid idea within the logic of the world, but it makes sense for Agnieszka because Agnieszka regularly does rash things if she thinks it's the right thing to do.
And the other thing is that is not super brave, so sometimes she kind of hypes herself up to do things out of like panic instead of thinking things through, because she knows she'll lose her nerve if she doesn't.
If she thinks about it at all, it's not going to happen. And she loves Kasia so much that she can't not try. She knows that there's a chance she probably won't be successful, but not trying is worse to her than to fail. And so she goes into the woods, and it is creepy and delicious and just atmospheric as fuck. There's nothing in the woods. It's silent. The trees are a little weird. She just learned a spell from Yaga's book about keeping yourself kind of like out of people's notice. Actually, no, it's not even. She sings a song about like a unnoticeable little like fly, and she's like, "I'm just a fly. You don't notice me. I'm just a little buzzing fly. Nothing to see here." And it works. Nothing sees her, and she has a spell apart from a hole. Wensa had a lock of Kasia's hair, and she uses it to lead her to where Kasia is. And she eventually finds Kasia. It's also winter, by the way. Snowing, the ground is hard. She finds Kasia strapped to a heart tree. And a heart tree are these giant trees that are the footprints of the forest. Where the heart trees go out, the forest extends. If you burn back heart trees and you burn back part of the woods, you can push it back. But the heart trees are like the sentinels. Attached to this heart tree, covered in a thin layer of bark, is Kasia, literally with a scream on her face, just inside this tree as it's like ingesting her. And it is absolutely fucking horrifying.
It's so creepy.
So creepy.
Because again, there's like this body horror to it, and the wood is actually like eating her. And like, again, it's so much better than the like shadow portals that open up enemies that you got in For the Wolf, where like it really feels like a video game. Like, oh, you got to clear this level and then It'll close up.
And there's also something to because in For the Wolf, people get corrupted. Like, there's a village person who accidentally fell through one of the tunnels and came back out. But he looked so not like a normal person that it didn't feel like you were fighting just a normal villager who fell through, where this book really does a beautiful job of keeping that horror that like and Will said there is a bit of a body horror element to it. Our girl is like, oh fuck, I gotta get her out. How do I get her out? She starts trying to peel back the bark, but it starts going over her own fingers, so she realizes she can't do that. She just learned this spell from Baba Yaga's book called Fulmia, and it is an earthquake spell that will literally shatter the earth, create like divots, drag things into it. And so she starts digging up, like her fingernails get bloody, her hands are sore, digging up the cold, hard, packed winter earth and just screaming into it the full sorry, Will, I banged against.
Apologize to our listeners who have to deal with all the sound pollution.
And screams Fulmia into the dirt and basically is like, I will bring this entire fucking forest down unless you let my friend out. Like, try me, bitch. And the tree's like, you know what? Okay. And just releases, because it starts like the roots are falling out and stuff, and it releases her. And she throws Kasha over her shoulder, and she like stumbles out of the wood, and Sarkin's there like, God damn it. Takes her, whisks her up to the tower, and starts pumping her full of this bright liquid. And at first it's sweet and she's enjoying drinking it, but then he keeps making her drink more and more, and it's making her sick. She doesn't like it. And then it starts making her body light up. And she sees inside her, despite the fact that she thought she got out just fine, there are wisps of black smoke corruption under her skin. She breathed in the air of the woods, and corruption is inside her, and she's immediately like, get it out.
It's so creepy because it's like, oh, they're in her, and she like, you can feel her panic of like, get them out.
And also how easily she didn't know it was there, and how it would have just slowly built up in her, and that had she been left to her own devices, she would have eventually gotten corrupted as fuck. He starts doing this like spell to kind of take it out of her and like almost burn them out of her, and they have to do rounds because she almost passes out. And then the last thing, and he doesn't tell her he's going to do this, but he chokes her and keeps her from breathing to kill the last of it in her. And it's just this horrible like scene. She's been through so much, and then he's like, what the fuck did you do, you idiotic girl? Like, you are just a terror.
He makes the point that, the forest let her go.
Yes.
She let her go so it could get its claws in you.
Yes, like, you played into the forest's hand. And she's like, maybe, but maybe we can save Kasia. And he won't let her see Kasia. He's locked her up somewhere. And eventually she speaks with Wensa and tells Wensa, like, hey, I got her out. She's corrupted, but I'm going to try save her. I don't know if I'll be successful, but I'm going to try. And Wensa wants her to let her see Kasia, and she obviously says no. Like, I don't know where he's put her. He won't let me know. And this moment happens, and this book does a really good thing with dealing with the complex emotions people have with each other. And Wensa yells at Agnieszka, like, you were always happy she was the one that was going to get chosen. You don't want to help because you got chosen instead, and you were jealous of Kasia. And it's this tirade of all the terrible feelings she had and her own guilt about her daughter that she just spews up on poor Agnieszka. Eventually apologizes, but it sucks. The dragon makes her sleep, but the next day she's like, I'd like to see Kasia, please. So he takes her down into the lowest part of the tower that's underground. And it's actually the only part of the original very, very old tower that was here that still survived. And it's a tomb. And he has locked her up in the bottom of the tomb. He puts like a ring of fire around her to keep her away from them. And they talk. And at first, Kasia seems fine. Like, she's talking to Agnieszka like normal, and like, no, it's okay. I understand. And Agnieszka is believing that Kasia is fine. But one of the things he did before he let her go in was she had to put up a protection spell. And basically, it's a way to cloak yourself to keep corruption from getting to you. And she's sitting there and she's having this conversation with Kasia, like trying to talk through things. And eventually she starts having these really dark thoughts about the dragon, about hurting him, so because he's never going to let Kasha out. He's going to keep her chained up in here, and it is inhuman. Just like he took all of those girls and he stole all of their lives and 10 years of all of their lives. He's terrible. And then she smells pine needles, which is part of her protection charm, and she realizes, oh shit, there is corruption here. It just tried to get me to kill Sarkin. And then she looks at Kasha, and then she sees, looking back out of Kasha's eyes, that dark, overpowering, menacing presence just staring out. And then she realizes, oh no, Kasha, this isn't Kasha. It's not her. She is incredibly corrupted. And then it starts laughing at, like, once the jig is up, it gives into the chaotic
Possession.
and she leaves, and she's so sad. And Sarkin, to his credit, lets her try things. They keep her locked up in the basement. They keep themselves protected, but he lets, every time Agnieszka thinks she has a spell she thinks will work, he lets her go downstairs, try it, because he's trying to get her to work through it herself. And he explains to her that once, when he was a young man, he was in a similar position where he fell in love with a woman who told him, oh, I can never be with you because my husband is corrupted, so I can't divorce him because he's corrupted, so I'm always going to have to be married. But if you make him uncorrupted, then I can leave him and marry you, which was a ploy. The woman just wanted her husband back.
Bitches be tripping.
He devoted himself to trying to save this woman's husband, and ended up having, like, other wizards had to be like, nah, get your shit together, buddy. We're burning him.
It's a really great flashback because this is the first time that he's really humanized. Or it's not a flashback, but it's described because this is the first time that the dragon Sarkon is really kind of humanized. Like, this is the first time they're having a moment that isn't just him yelling at her for being messy. And it also gives you an idea of what's going on with him, in that you kind of get the sense that he was kind of like a court dandy a little bit, like he was into the court and like what was going on there. And then he came to the tower, which at the time was being protected by a mage called the Raven. And, he doesn't say it, but you get the sense that, like, he realized how dark this place is and, like, what's going on with the woods, and that, like, it's a serious threat. And so later, once the other wizards have cleaned the corruption, or actually just killed the Baron who was infected, they were like, oh, okay, we're going to have to,
Punish you.
and he's like, okay, I'm going to go to the tower. And they're like, what? Like, that's like a place to be exiled. And you realize, like, okay, he now realizes the real fight.
This is the most important fight. And so everything he does surrounding, also, we forgot to mention this, he is the most powerful wizard in Polnia. He is a bamf, and he flexes it at one point, and it's a great scene, and I love it. She asks, can we try that book that I read earlier, can we try that one, Lute Summoning? And he's like, yeah, I mean, it shows truth. We can try it. And what they're able to do, what this spell does, because it's a spell that shows truth, or the true things, and it shows all the corruption in Kasha, but it lets them access where Kasha is actually being held, which is this kind of mind version of the woods. They're able to pull her out and then burn the corruption out of her. It nearly kills her, but they save her. And there's a moment where Agnieszka makes the choice of burning the corruption out of her might kill her, but that's better than her living this way. And it works. They get Kasha out. Kasha is changed. She's really strong now, like so strong she accidentally hurts people. And she's like, you can chop her arm with a sword, and the sword's gonna get fucked up.
She basically is like, under the skin, she's wood now.
Really hardwood. Like, and there's a moment where she realizes that this has happened, and she's like, oh no, and like she stops hugging people because she's afraid of hurting them, and it's really cute.
And it's nice because Agnieszka, like, she's happy she's alive, but she realizes what toll this is going to take on Kasia, and that Kasia can't just go back and marry like a village boy now, and she will always be viewed as being corrupted, even though she isn't. And that's one of the things that Novik does, is she has all these little moments that, like, play into the humanity of the characters that in another book, we talked about how in one of the books, Keeper, one of the main characters gets bitten by a werewolf and then is like, really like, oh, this is super cool, like, whatever, this is gonna be awesome. And it's like, no, you can't see your family again. Novik is always very good at contextualizing the weight and cost of what's going on in her books.
What happens is, this is the point where Sarkin and her do that spell together, because they realize the other thing that happened when they freed Kasia was the heart tree that she had been attached to burns. That by burning the corruption out of Kasia, it created a channel directly to the heart tree, and they were able to hurt the wood, which is great. And he sends like some of his little wispy spy boys into the woods to verify that the heart tree had been burnt down. This is when him and Agnieszka do the flower thingy. And again, the little cute bees. It's a nice working. Their powers are melding together. They finish the working and she kisses him. Or he kisses her, but then she like jumps on him and like things are happening. She says a spell that kind of rips apart his clothes. And then there's a point where she just says, and then he put his thumb on me, and like she lit up and she was like, oh shit. And she like jumps off of him and she's like, oh God, what was that? I've never been touched there before. And she like freaks out and he's like, God, I can see you jumped into this without knowing what you wanted. And he gets all huffy and he leaves. And she goes back to her room and Kasha's like, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, I'm fine. It's a great scene.
This is a good point to mention that one thing that I did feel with, like, I like Kasia as a character, but she always felt a little bit more hollow to me than the other characters. I would have liked, like, 2 conversations between her and Agnieszka, just to, like, feel like, because I can't quite picture how they would talk normally, and I feel like it would have just helped ground her just a little bit. Again, it's not a huge problem with the story, but it is something that I think could be, like, tweaked to be better.
I would agree. The first time I read it, I found Kasia a little bit hollow. Since then, I've kind of reframed, and this is something I don't know if I did this or if it's there, but I reframed their friendship as maybe one that didn't have a lot of speaking, that they're 2 fundamentally different people with very different personalities, but they've always been there, kind of like sister best friends, where like this is just someone who is integrally important to my life. But yes, that could be done. And there is a cute conversation when Agnieszka is first like, I'm magic, and Kasia's like, oh man, how did I not tell? It would be winter and you'd come back with berries and you always found a way to get dirty. And it's a cute little thing. But Will is right, having a couple more, because there's a lot of scenes between Agnieszka and Kasia, but most of them have no words. So I'm crying. There's a beautiful scene at the end of the book where they like touch foreheads, and like it's all this kind of, and that's why I said it feels less like a best friendship than kind of like a quiet companionship, someone who's just there, who you rely on as a presence in your life. So then coming down to the tower is a bunch of men led by Prince Marek and this other wizard called the Falcon, because Kasia's mom, Wensa, told them that they uncorrupted her and they got her out of the woods. And like now everyone knows. And so it got to the castle and people think that the dragon's gone crazy, that he's let this happen and now he's going to be corrupted. So Solya, the Falcon wizard, tries to like open the doors, and Sarkin just stands there and lets him try. And basically he's like, I'm not corrupted. If I was corrupted, you'd be fucked already. Go ahead and look at the girl. And Solya basically spends several days trying to assess whether there's corruption in her or not. And what you find out is that Prince Marek, for years now, has been trying to mount a party to go into the woods and rescue his mother. 20 years ago, a Russian delegation came from Russia with a Prince Vasily. And Prince Vasily and the Queen Hana, eloped, ran off together, ended up in the woods, and have been missing ever since. And it has been the big cause of all the wars between Russia and Poland since, because the Russians blame Poland for losing their crown prince. Poland blames Russia. Wars have ensued ever since. And Marek has never given up the hope that his mother is in the woods and can be rescued.
I love this motivation for him, by the way, because it like, there's a moment where it's like he's almost like a little boy when he does see his mother. It's a nicely complex thing for a character who otherwise could just be a dick. But like, no, he really wants to save his mother.
And he just misses her. It is such a solid and consistent motivation. And it really is coming from the simplistic place of love. When they heard in the capital that Sarkin had apparently gotten a girl out of the woods and had purged her, he's like, perfect. He pretended to be going to kill Kasia, because you're supposed to kill people who are corrupted, but he's actually there to verify if this is doable. The Falcon, Solya, is coming with him to be his verification. Eventually Solya's like, yeah, there's really nothing in her, she seems fine. And he's like, perfect, we're going in, we're gonna do. And Sarkin's like, absolutely not, your mother has been in there for 20 years, what do you think we're gonna find of her? Like a bag of bones?
This is such a bad idea.
This is such a bad idea. And I'm all with Sarkin here. Like, I'm so glad it worked for you, Agnieszka, but like, she'd been in there for like a day and a half. Like, what do you think? If she had been attached to if the queen had been attached to a heart tree, how deep is she in there? Like, what are we doing? Sarkin and Marek are arguing. Marek's like, we must, it's our duty. He's like, we're gonna just waste men, and you're gonna literally hand a wizard to the woods. Like, this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And then Agnieszka's like, what if we could weaken the woods before we did this? And they're all like, ooh, good idea. And basically what her idea is to take Yerzy, who was corrupted, purge him, and kill the heart tree that he's connected to so that they can deal a bad enough blow to the woods that they'll be able to go in and get the queen out. And then the deal that the dragon makes with Marek is after they do this, they will then go in and just burn back a ton of the forest, and Marek will give the dragon enough men to be able to deal a really bad blow. The dragon agrees, mainly because he realizes now it's going to happen without him, and he knows it is a worse idea to let them go in without him than it is to go in with him. So they mount an expedition, and I'm going to go really quick through this scene, even though it is one of the best in the whole goddamn book.
That's great.
Like, if you want an excellent, brutal, creepy battle scene, I can highly, highly recommend. They go in with 30 men. They come out with like 2. Marek and like 2 other soldiers. The horses are killed, and there's a bunch of like weird little deaths. Like, there's a point in the woods where somebody's face covering goes down. He breathes in enough corruption that he just throws himself into the water.
No. It's so weird. He's just riding along and he slits another guy's throat and goes into the water. And you're just like, what just happened?
And it comes out of nowhere, because like Agnieszka just hears a sigh, and she turns, and this man is just smiling. The thing is fallen down off of his face, and then he just slits the throat of the guy next to him, and you're like, what is happening? Anyway, and it's a big battle. There's these praying mantis things. There's walkers that have come. And basically, she can't use Fulmia now. It wouldn't be as effective because the wood knows what they're trying to do. And the wood also knows, because before, the wood let Kasia go, not realizing, they thought, that they would be able to then burn the heart tree and destroy the heart tree once they had Kasia out of it. Because the whole reason the heart tree gave up Kasia was to avoid being destroyed. But now the wood knows that if they get the queen out, and she's like deep in this tree, if they get the queen out, they're still going to be able to destroy the heart tree down the line. She starts trying to suck, and the reason I'm mentioning this is because there's a really creepy that happens, and I want to say it. She starts sucking the water out of the roots of the tree and just drying, like making a little desert around this tree. And one of the walkers, or one of the mantises, takes a man, shoves a bunch of the fruit that's growing off the tree, the sickeningly sweet smelling, almost rotten smelling fruit, and they just start shoving it in this man's throat, like fruit after fruit. And then they slit his throat and hang him upside down so his blood spills over the roots of the tree, which gives the tree life again. And it's just fucking terrible. The tree starts eating Sarkin. Then Agnieszka has to like do a thing. She ends up saving him. Marek is like killing people. Kasia has to come in and start fighting because she's basically invulnerable now. It's just this intense battle. They get the queen out of the tree. Her hair and her fingernails are so long they have to like cut her hair out because it's literally grown into the tree. They take her out. They all collapse because they are basically like done, dusted.
This is the great part, is that in the aftermath of it, they stumble eventually out of the forest and they're all basically catatonic. Like, they cannot function. They cannot really think. They just kind of like sit down. And it's such a great, like, oh, wow, this is the power of the wood, that like even defeating it in this way, they are totally drained.
They can't move. And Kasia looks at them and realizes, oh shit, I need to get them, because they need to go to Zatochek, which is the village nearest the woods, to get the purging liquid. And Kasia has to go and like get them a little wagon because she's the only one who can move. She's the only one that's fine. They end up in Zatochek. They all have to go through purging things, like to make sure that none of them are corrupted. It takes a while. And they're not really doing anything with the queen. And you realize the queen isn't corrupted. She's just empty. She's not talking. She just stares. She doesn't even eat. Like, and she's not, they keep looking for corruption in her, and she's empty. There's nothing there. And so, like, they're not really paying her much mind. And Marek is like, you must heal my mother. And they're like, listen, I can't heal nothing. Like, there's nothing there, buddy boy. I hope this was worth it for you. That this ended up being worth it. Eventually, they have to go back to the capital. And Marek basically says, everyone who is corrupted needs to be put to death, so we have to go do a trial, and you can either come and help, or, Kasia will also have to be, like, we're taking Kasia, you can either come and speak in defense of her, or you can stay here. And so she has to leave the dragon in the tower, and she heads off with Marek, the falcon, and Kasia and the empty-eyed queen to the capital. The capital is great. There's a bunch of interesting things that happen, like Will said, that shows how much she is just completely unprepared and knows nothing about like city life. But the important things that happen are she gets named as a wizard because he told her, if you want to speak during the trial, you need to get put on the wizard list. And it's great because all the wizards have no idea what to do with Agnieszka. She can't do like most of the spells they ask her to do. And she's like, this is not the kind of magic I do. And this one guy, Father Paolo, is like, this is the only magic, girl. What are you talking about? And eventually they're just talking to her like she's dumb and young, and she gets mad, and she fulmias like in the middle of the castle, and it causes a massive earthquake just in the capital city.
She basically stomps her foot and creates an earthquake.
And she just, and then she was like, is that enough magic for you, motherfuckers? And then the king comes and was like, who just shook my fucking castle? And so then they have to put her on the list. The trial takes a while to happen because what you discover is the king is actually in the middle of trying to get married to another princess from another place to strengthen the country. And so he's not really here to deal with his wife. And eventually, like, the trial does happen. Everyone has tried to find corruption in the queen, and they can't, but nobody's willing to say there is no corruption. Agnieszka has a thought about doing the summoning in front of everyone to show them that the queen is fine, and maybe using Solia, but she kind of doesn't want to do magic with him because he's real skeevy. So what she does instead is she plays into what she has learned is the love of spectacle and the love of a story in the capital, and she makes it look like the woods, and she basically projects the battle where they save the queen. And after this, the queen suddenly starts talking and is like, no, I know I was corrupted in the woods. I will die for my country. It is fine, my love. Kill me. But at this point, nobody can kill her because she's obviously fine now.
She basically is like, also like, oh no, it wasn't me. I got kidnapped by the Russians.
Prince Vasily tied me to the tree himself.
Yeah, he was corrupted, but the thing that people take from this is not that he was corrupted, but that the Russians, you can't trust them. There's also a thing that happened before this, where Agnieszka was looking through a library trying to find more like Baba Yaga type spells that she could actually use, and she found a bestiary, a book of beasts, that actually has shadow in it, that like is a corrupting force from the forest. And Alyosha and
Father Paolo,
I thought of him as the Pope, but yeah, Father Paolo. They're like, oh wow, we did not see anything about that. And you figure out that's how the person who stole the queen, was originally corrupted.
This book came in with that diplomatic party from Russia 20 years ago, so evidently the book had corrupted them, and then was able to, and so like basically you learn the wood made this plan 20 years ago through this book, and Agnieszka imagines like some poor like artist getting sucked into the woods, being forced to make this bestiary. And what the bestiary does is, if you read it, it turns you into one of the fucking beasts. And there's this great scene. So there's this character named Alyosha, who we're not going to have time to go into, but she's fantastic and I love her.
Bamf.
Absolute bamf. When they were first chronicling this book, Hydra appeared and they killed it. And she's like, and what they realized is it was one of their old apprentices who happened to be reading and cataloging the book to put it like away.
And they always thought he was like just kind of like, why he was like kind of shitty for running away, but it was like, no, he actually,
or that he got killed by the creature. And then they were like, oh no, it is him. And so they were like, basically like, I guess we should take his head down where we've mounted it in one of the hallways. Like, that sucks. Agnieszka realizes that there is a plan, that as Sarkin has been telling her for ages, that the woods has been planning something and has been laying traps. And she finally is face to face with it. And she's like, oh shit, I need to go talk to the king and let him know that this has happened. And she runs to kind of go talk to them, and she sees the queen come out of there was a meeting happening, a diplomatic meeting planning the invasion of Russia. And the queen comes out and she looks at the queen and she feels an overwhelming sense of dread. And she's like, oh no, I fucked up. I absolutely fucked up. The wood is trying to get us. And then she also remembers, because she told them to burn the bestiary, but Father Paolo was like, no, I'll try purge it first. I don't love burning books. We'll see if that works. And she's like, oh God, he's going to try purge the book. It's gonna get him. So she runs back to the library. She gets there and there's this giant, terrible beast. just raging and fighting, and like her and Kasia go in. Marek and the Falcon are there. She eventually has to summon a bolt of lightning to kill this thing, but then they discover the king's dead.
And it's so sad because you really liked Father Balo, and you're like, oh, he's kind
Well,
of
yeah,
cool.
Father Ballo got turned into the monster, and they had to kill him. Like, it's just so
Yeah.
sad. Like, he wanted to save this book. He didn't want to burn a book, and then it got him, and it ended up killing the king because for some reason he was there. The wood lays some really good plans.
The wood is so cunning.
So fucking crafty. She ends up casting lightning, killing them. A bunch of people blame her because she found the book, but Marek's like, no, Agnieszka just saved us. What are you talking about? There's no way she would have done this. And she's like, you have to see that there's like, this is the problem. We need to deal with this. And he was like, no, no, no. Russia gave us that book. Russia's the problem. He starts immediately planning to invade again. And the queen decides that they're going to send Prince Sigmund in to go do this battle instead of Marek. He ends up dying on the battlefront. Agnieszka realizes something is fucked up with the queen, and she goes to the Falcon to be like, hey, will you cast the summoning with me so we can see what's happening? And he was like, no, the queen's fine. And Marek is like, no, it's Russia. And she realizes that the palace is corrupted now. Corruption is here. It is infecting people. It is dealing like people, and they're making not great decisions.
And also, a lot of the decisions they're making are just from their own self-interest and politicking. Like, it's that whole, like, okay, you're pettifogging the great evil that's coming. And it's smart because the crown prince dying in this battle against the Russians, like, both disempowers him, and also, like, now there's a bunch of dead people, and Russia doesn't have any, like, military on the side of the wood.
So it's just really fantastic because you discover Prince Marek is trying to become king, and if he had gone to fight Russia and he won, then Marek would have been picked to be king. So Sigmund has to go, and it's just all this like she does a really good job of giving the capital its own politics and stuff. But what really is fantastic here is that growing sense of dread as she realizes shit's going very wrong. And what ends up happening is Alyosha. And what sucks is Alyosha's just so reasonable. There's a point where she's like, honestly, we should just send the queen and Kasia to Gibna, which is by the ocean. The ocean washes away corruption, and it's for the farthest place from the woods. We'll send them there for 10 years. If everything is fine, we'll deal with it then. And you realize that would have been the best idea. But no, the queen has been accepted back into society, and she's causing shit. And eventually a pack of men dressed as Russian soldiers come in, kill the
Crown prince's wife,
and are trying to kill his 2 children. But Alyosha knew that something would probably happen to them, so she's been protecting them and sitting with them.
Kasia is also there because Kasia's a badass.
Agnieszka comes in, finds Alyosha fighting these men. Her armor, like they set fire to the room, so her armor has kind of like fused to her skin. She's on her last leg. The princess is dead, but had been standing in front of the wardrobe that she hid her kids in and had died protecting her children. Kasia's there defending the kids with like a knife she found. Agnieszka comes, she like gets everybody done, and then Alyosha's like, you need to take the kids and you need to go. Don't trust anyone, get the fuck out. And she gives to Agnieszka the sword that she's been forging for 100 years. That at this point is more spell than it is metal. It's just, it remembers the shape of a sword. And what it is it's a like this life-sucking sword. It is good for one stroke. You get one choppity chop with this thing, and then it'll suck all the life force out, but that's it. She's like, here you go, you're gonna need this. I don't know if I can be of help. She passes out. You think for a brief moment that maybe she's dead. They take the kids, her and Kasia, and Agnieszka is like drained at this point. She literally completely emptied herself of magic using the lightning spell to kill the Father Balo monster. So she's drained. She's not doing too hot. They kind of escape. They get out, and she makes this is what I mentioned. She at a certain point, she stops using spells. She literally takes some twigs and mud, and she fashions like a cart of oxen. And they get in, and they just start going. And she like has to explain to the kids like, your dad's dead, and we're sorry your mom died. Stochek, the prince, the little prince who's now, like he's trying so hard to be like brave and useful, and Kasia's like, and they basically mad dash in a day back to the tower, all the time being pursued, so they have to hide.
Because the thing is that Marek thinks that they're gonna like kill the kids, or that the Russians have been trying to kill them, or that they've been corrupted by the wood. So it's like, again, Marek is like actually not a horrible person. His motivations are so understandable.
He legitimately thinks that they've been corrupted, that they killed Alyosha. And it's interesting because there's a period where you don't think that. You think he has just been corrupted, but there's a point later where you hear what he thought was happening and you're like, oh yeah, it makes sense that you would react the way you did. So they end up getting back to the tower. Sarkin has been fighting Zatocek because the minute they left for the capital, the Woods started trying to make some moves. So Sarkin has already been like having a rough go of it.
And it's hilarious because she's so happy to see him and to get back and like be saved, and he's just immediately grumpy about the whole thing. He just immediately is like, "What have you gotten yourself into this time?"
There's this great moment where he looks out the window and he sees the army coming towards him, and he goes, because he sent her to the capital to get the king to send men to help them combat the Woods. And he goes, well, you brought men. And he's also disheveled. You can tell that he's not doing too great. They start making plans and making defenses because the Baron of the Yellow Marshes immediately knew that shit was not okay and didn't believe what the capital was saying and went to warn Sarkin that an army was coming and they're going to help defend the tower. Agnieszka starts helping him add defenses. They build walls to make sieging the tower really costly for Marek. Marek does not give a fuck. He thinks they're going to feed the kids to the Woods and tie them to heart trees, which he does not want to happen. The queen has also come in like a white dress and she's ready to fight. And there's a great, long, exhausting battle, like siege battle.
What's great about it is that the way that Novik sets it up, you understand the human stakes of it. So like there's a part beforehand where Agnieszka is looking at like some soldiers sharpening a spear, and she has the thought of like, why is he here? Was it because, he has a girl he liked back home and he wants to become a captain and do well and then come back to her? Or did he just...
His family was poor and he needed the money and he's sending his paychecks home to his family.
Right, or is he just here for like glory and adventure? And it's fascinating because it's that one Shakespeare scene that everyone talks about that's great, and I forget what it's called, but where like the king is sitting with the soldiers before battle and you realize the humanness of like the soldiers and what's actually going on. And you really get into the mindset of like, yeah, these are like men at arms. They're not here to like, they're not like gung-ho fighters. It's, she talks about how they're like coins in a purse that are going to be spent
on this war,
and that doesn't really have anything to do with them. And so as the battle is going on, you have that feeling of just the devastation and loss and waste of it.
And that this battle is not the battle that should be being fought. That fighting the Wood is the actual battle, and this is just life being wasted because of a misunderstanding. It's a very fantastic battle. Right before the battle actually takes place, her and Sarkin do the do. It's a great scene. I love it. Highly recommend.
Let's just say that Sarkin can take care of business.
No, Sarkin is as precise and exacting with lovemaking as he is with spell work. Let me just put it that way. There's a point where Agnieszka's like impatient and she's like, now! And he was like, a little patience, please. And you're like, okay, sorry.
You could probably have faded to black at that point, but I understand that for some people, it was a big selling point of the book.
I love it.
Anyway, the battle happens. It's really bloody. So many people are dying. They get pushed back into the basement of the tower. There's almost none of the Duke's men left. And then they see coming through Mark and the Queen are descending.
As they were coming into the castle or the tower, they started trying to do the summoning because she thinks maybe if we can show him that the Queen is corrupted, Marek will see reason. So they start doing the summoning. But this point happens where they get distracted and they lose the thread of the spell. And one of the things you learn about is when you're doing a working, especially a major working like the summoning, if you lose the thread of the spell, it could have catastrophic
consequences.
They lose the thread of the spell and rips in reality just start appearing. The book itself just disappears in one of them. They no longer have the book, and poor Sarkin is just saying the last words of the spell that he read over and over in an attempt to keep it from combusting and just like imploding on itself. And so they end up in the like lowest part of the castle, and the Queen starts coming down, and you get the sense that whatever is looking out from the Queen's eyes has been in this room before. And Agnieszka starts continuing the summoning. She picks the thread of it back up, and even though she doesn't have the words in front of her anymore, she's able to say it. Like, she remembers enough of it. Like, she knows the shape of the spell so she can put it together. And Sarkin starts giving her magic to do so, and you see that once upon a time, there was this wood queen, this queen who is made out of wood and birch and stuff. You see a vision of her being led down into this tomb the old king of the people who lived here before them, like the nation before Polnia. The old king is being lowered into his coffiny stone resting place. She's very sad. You can tell that she doesn't understand death. Like, she doesn't know why this man isn't getting up. So you get the sense that she loved this man, and there's a lot of confusion and sadness here. And a grumpy faced guy tells her, you take as much time as you need in here. And she goes and she's like sitting there, she's talking about it, and then when she looks back out, she sees a bunch of men like bricking her into this tomb.
House of Usher style.
And they've made it so that there's these blue flames that suck magic, so she cannot, because there's a point where she tries to use what you assume would be magic and she can't. And she has just been bricked into this prison. It's not a tomb, it's a prison for this wood queen. And she gets angry and bitter, and you feel it.
She's not dying, she's stuck there forever. And it's such a great reveal of the villain, because it's so creepy, and you feel her fury and the horror of it, and it's great.
And as the vision fades, they see vines and trees from the forest busting through around the queen that is Marek's mother. And he realizes, looking at her, like, oh, they were right. She is corrupted. And he goes up to her like a child, and he grasps her hands, and he's like, Mama, it's Marek. Come back. I know you can defeat this. Just come, take hold of yourself again. And she kills him by putting her, like, her hands turn to roots, and she just puts her hand through his chest and rips out his heart.
But he never sees it.
He doesn't see it.
That's the one mercy, is he never knows that his mother did that to him. He's not a great guy, but it's such a well-suched character, and it's such a good death for him in terms of being fitting.
And it's sad. Like, it's so sad. But anyway, and then as the queen is coming towards them to kill them, and they're weak and everything, from behind, Kasia whips out Alyosha's sword and slashes the queen, who turns completely to roots, and you can see the sword sucking up her life force. But at the last moment, the woods makes a calculated decision to sever itself from the body of this queen, and flushes, like, all the roots, the dark corruption runs back towards the woods. And so they're just left in the rubble of the fucking tower. The queen's dead, Marek is dead. Solya's like, oh man, I really picked the wrong side of this. And just immediately is like pretending like nothing happened. They were like, okay, we need to take the kids, we need to go. And at one point, there's a point where someone's like, we need to take him back to the capital. And Kasia's like, no, King Stashek told me he would like to go to Gibna to his mother's family, and that is where I'm going to take the king. And it's just this great scene.
Well, the thing is, this whole time they've been talking about how they need more men to get into the woods and to take down these heart trees. And now there are no men left. They're all dead.
The entire army of Poland, yeah.
Yeah, this battle has cost basically any force that could take on the forest. And so it's like, it's such great maneuvering on the part of the wood, and there's like a sense of hopelessness.
The dragon's like, okay, we have to leave. We have to go somewhere else. And Agnieszka's like, no, it'll just keep coming. Because what you discover is, after the woods took over the valley previously, when the old nation was there, it just stopped. It took over the whole valley, and then it went to sleep. Then Polnia, the kingdom of Polnia, came to be and started eating into the valley and cutting down trees and making homes for themselves in the valley, because what you discover is the valley has something that draws people to it. There's a channel in the people and the valley that is a connection. Similar to like the channels that the evil heart trees have with the corrupted people, the valley literally has a hold on people that the dragon view looks at as a malicious hold, but what you discover is actually not. There is something powerful and pure in the valley that is being corrupted by what's in the woods. And so she knows that the woods are just gonna eat the valley again, and it will keep going. It will get to Gibna. There's nowhere they can go. They need to deal with it now.
I loved it. It was so creepy.
And the dragon's like, well, what the fuck are we supposed to do? And she goes, I don't know, but I'm going. Are you coming with me? And so they just decide, fuck it, we're just gonna go. So the two of them get in a boat. They walk, they find a random boat on the Spindle River. They get in it. They row themselves in, and eventually they pass like the twisted heart trees and stuff, but then they end up in a kind of clearing that's been sunken in, so there's a little waterfall, and the spindle pools here, because a big thing is, where does the spindle go? Rivers normally go out to the ocean. This one just goes into the forest, and then it doesn't come out on the other end. Where the fuck is the spindle going? And where you find out is it's going to this pool in this little sunken grove of trees, and these are all heart trees, but they don't look grotesque and mutilated and dark like the other ones. There's actually sunlight here, like lovely rustling of leaves. And you get the sense that this is in the heart of the woods, but there's something else happening. And at the edge of the pool, there's a giant, big heart tree. And there's a mound next to it. And on the mound, sleeping, is the Wood Queen. And she's been wrapped in vines. And she's literally been sleeping. And her dreams have been so angry and corrupt. That is what has been working through the forest this whole time. But this little area has been preserved. Something is happening in this little clearing that is not corrupted. Eventually they battle, they try to burn her. It doesn't work. She gets angry. She gets so angry because they realize she's trying to protect the one heart tree because the fire started going at it and she started trying to protect it. So they think, oh, that heart tree must be her power source. If we destroy it, it'll destroy her. So they attack it and she freaks the fuck out. She starts trying to hold it together and wrap vines around it. She gets so angry. She grabs Agnieszka, like shoves fruit down her throat, and then throws her into the tree, and the bark closes up around her. And then all of a sudden, Agnieszka thinks that she's breaking out of the tree, but when she breaks out, she's in the same clearing, but there's not a lot of trees there anymore. Like, it was packed with big heart trees, and now there's like one. It's also flat. There's no divot that makes the waterfall leading to the clearing. It's just one flat space. And she starts walking, and she walks to the edge of the woods, and she sees another tree person. Not the Wood Queen tree person, but a similar look to her, but different colors, coming on a boat down the spindle towards the forest. And so you get the sense that Agnieszka is now seeing a vision. She's seeing something out of time. And a boat comes, and in the boat is the old king of the old kingdom before, he was dead. And he's a young man, and next to him is the Wood Queen, but she's beautiful and happy, and the other wood lady on the bank is her sister, which she greets with love. And basically, the Wood Queen is marrying this human king. When the humans came to the valley, the Wood Queen was like, we've forgotten to be more person-like. Let's learn from the humans and have an exchange of ideas. So she went to go marry the king. She went to go learn from the king. They ended up falling in love. Her sister's a bit cautious and is like, why are you leaving us? And she's like, no, don't worry, I'll be in the tower. But eventually, there's the lady talking to Agnieszka says the humans learned the wrong things. They learned the wrong lesson, which was to be scared of the Wood Queen and to be scared of the other wood people. And eventually, when the old king dies and they lock the Wood Queen into the chamber at the bottom of her prison at the bottom, they go to attack the wood people. And the Wood Queen's sister realizes this was happening, so they made a decision where they themselves had forgotten a lot of what it meant to be person-like. And so they just decide to stop. All of the wood people that are left that haven't been killed go to the clearing, and they all start eating some of the fruit from the trees that are currently there and drinking water from the spindle. And they turn into trees, and they just become the beautiful silver non-corrupted heart trees. And what they're doing is they know that their time here, like their way of life, is done. Everything is supposed to change. They know their time is done, and rather than go out violently or terribly, they're choosing to just be peacefully dreaming as trees. The Wood Queen's sister waits until everybody else has done it. She helps some people who are stuck halfway through the transformation. She helps them all these trees, and then she takes the fruit and she becomes a tree and she starts dreaming. Time passes. Years later, after this is done, because again, the humans were coming to attack them. They come and they find no one, so they leave. Years later, the Wood Queen gets out of her prison. She is decimated the population of people who lived there. When she got out of that prison, she went on a rampage. Anyone in that tower, anyone in that kingdom, she got rid of them. And she comes back and she tells her sister, I did it. I had to get rid of them, and I did it. I got rid of them. But she sees her sister as the tree, and she starts crying because she now has forgotten the right things. She has forgotten to be at peace and not to be angry, and she's filled with all of these emotions. So her sister, fruit drops down off the tree and lands, and she picks it up and she goes to bite it for a moment, almost choosing to have that long, sleepy tree dream. And then she hears the sound of a woodcutter cutting down a tree in the woods, and she gets angry. So she goes and she starts fighting with them, and they're chopping down a heart tree that happened to be on the edge of the spindle, like on the edge of the river, and they're cutting it down, and it splits in half, and she is so upset because it wasn't just a tree, it was a heart tree. That's one of her people. It's literally a soul of one of her people. She gets so angry. She takes one of the woodcutters and she shoves the fruit into him and she attaches him to the tree. And this is that moment that he turns into part of the tree and he wraps corrupted. And because he is in pain, he infects the dream, that peaceful, sleepy tree dream that's happening. He infects it with his pain. And the tree goes from being a normal, happy heart tree to being the first corrupted, terrible, misshapen thing with the ugly sap smelling fruit. And this is the origin story of the
Queen.
Wait, let me finish and then you can do your thing. Will has thoughts. So basically Agnieszka sees this story and she's like, oh, this sucks. And the lady's like, yes, I'm showing you this though because you are now inside me and I can't get rid of you. And you have a choice. You either can choose to continue to be human, in which case you will poison me and kill me and make my existence terrible, or you can just accept the dream. And Agnieszka's like, I don't want to do either, but I don't want to make your life, your existence terrible. And as she's thinking of this, she hears Sarkin and he's doing the summoning by himself. He is getting the summoning. And so she's able to get out of the tree. Now go, Will. You say your piece.
So here's the thing. I don't love this backstory. Again, I would say that this does not ruin the book for me. I still think it's a very good book, all of that. But in general, I think I dislike it was all a misunderstanding villains, where it's like, oh, if we had only listened to each other, we could have gotten along. And I prefer creepy eldritch forest with queen fueled by vengeance of having to live for hundreds of years underground, or probably not hundreds of years, but that was like the thought that I had. And like I prefer that as a villain to well, the same thing happened with Spinning Silver, where like that plot could mostly have been handled just by people talking to each other properly,
I don't think so. That fire creature,
except for the fire creature.
that's the majority of the plot.
The Star Wiki could have like just listened to the humans more.
But they fundamentally, I mean, I guess so. But oh, are you talking specifically about the Stark and them as a villain?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the Stark are basically like pretty chill. They just were not like listening. And like it's interesting because with the human characters like the prince, I felt like, it's really interesting to have these characters at opposing poles, and really they could have just listened to each other, but they didn't, and that causes a lot of conflict. And it was differing motivations. But like we had creepy eldritch tree, and then we had like, oh, we should have listened to the elves.
I get that, and I get that point, but I don't agree. I think it just makes her descent, because she is not redeemed. You don't look at her and think, ah, yes, this bad thing you lived through justified everything. No. Even Agnieszka's like, nah, you deserve to die, motherfucker. And she is an eldritch horror.
She's too explained for her to really be an eldritch horror, and the forest itself is no longer just a malevolent, horrible thing. It's like, oh, these were people sleeping. I think I would have liked it more if like she couldn't enter the dream at this point. Like
I
she
agree.
came back and the dream was beyond her, and that's her hate. Like her people left without her and she is alone. I think that would have helped a little bit. I don't know. I just didn't love like the introduction of it at the very end. And again, like going into this forest scene, it was so creepy and powerful, and then it became more like, oh, we should have, the real lesson is that we have to pay attention to each other and respect each other.
But see, the thing is, I didn't think that was the lesson. I thought the lesson was people, like, creatures have their times. The tree people's time was done. It was time for them to move on. But there was a shitty thing that happened to the queen that was legitimately shitty, that no amount of listening, like, because what she was doing and what the rest of her people were doing were completely different.
I think that would make more sense if she couldn't enter the dream, or she didn't want to for some reason other than wanting to protect her people. I think her wanting to protect her people from being cut down causes problems thematically. Though I guess you're right in that her people were okay getting chopped down, but she wasn't okay letting them go or something like that.
Exactly. Like, her people chose to move on and to just no longer exist. And, like, eventually a tree will die. Her people were okay. And even her sister was like, yeah, I would have been okay with dying. Like, it's fine. She has been corrupted. She is corrupt. And all that happens in the end is she chooses, like, by eating the fruit. And I think, I imagine it more of her sister guiding her through and her choosing to enter her sister's dream, not her own.
I think that makes sense. Again, I don't love
For
it as
you,
much.
I knew you wouldn't love it. I knew you wanted it to just be the eldritch horror and to have like no redeem. just like this is
It's
the
so creepy, atmospheric. I just prefer that, I think. But again, it's not a bad ending or it's not a bad resolution to the villain by any means.
I really enjoyed it because I loved that moment. It gives it such flavor for when they're attacking her sister's tree and she goes like the ferocious passion she goes to save her, and she would literally corrupt her sister's peace before she lets her sister die. That kind of moment. And then Agnieszka realizing what's happening, and Agnieszka comes out of the tree, the lady's like trying to attach her, and she's like, "You're gonna corrupt your sister if you do this. You can save her yourself if you'd like to. You have an option." Because what Agnieszka realizes is that if the Wood Queen turns into a tree around her sister, then they can be one big happy tree together, which is how the book ends. she uh she gets the Wood Queen, and she says to like the Wood Queen, "I'll help you," and she helps the Wood Queen do this transformation similar to how her sister was helping some of those other people. So she gets her the water from the spindle, because the lady, I think she says, I think I've forgotten how.
Yeah, she's like, "I can't."
Oh, that's the other thing. She forgot that she had to eat that was a part of it. She forgot she had to eat the fruit and drink the spindle water. She literally forgot how to do this. She forgot how to become a tree, and that's why she just slept next to her sister. And Agnieszka's like, "Don't worry, I went back in time and I've seen it. I can do this for you. I can give you this gift." And so the tree, the Wood Queen, wraps herself around. She gets the water. She turns into a tree, and they are now this big happy one tree of sisterhood. And that's how the book ends. And then they go back. Well, that's how the battle ends. They go back. Sarkin's like, "I need to go with the kids." And what I liked about this is the Wood Queen being dealt with does not fix the corruption in other things. There are creatures in the forest that once released from the Wood Queen started working how they usually did, but there were other things that just had their own hate, their own issues, their own anger that are continuing to plague the woods. There is corruption. Like there's the corrupted heart trees are corrupted. And in the capital, there's still corruption. So Sarkin's like, "I need to go and I need to deal with that."
Agnieszka also realizes, though, that he's going to run away, essentially, because emotionally he doesn't like sticky human emotions.
And also because he knows that at a certain point he will become bonded to this valley. The magic, the spindle is a force of magic, especially in that pool that was surrounding the good heart trees. It is a force of magic. It is what ties people. There is a sense of peace in this valley that's the reason why the people who lived there never left, despite the fact there was an evil wood right there that at any moment could attack them. They never left because they were tied to this valley. The dragon does not want to be tied to no valley. He doesn't want to be tied nowhere. So he escapes, or he runs away as Agnieszka, and he says like, "Oh, I'll be back," and she doesn't think he will because he doesn't want to actually like tie himself here. He's always kept himself apart. He leaves and he's like, "Come on, we'll go together." And Agnieszka's like, "No, I'm going back in the woods. I've got to deal with shit. Like it's not done." So he leaves, and then you pick up like an undetermined amount of time later.
Well, what's happened is she's been like going through the woods and healing them and destroying the heart trees that can't. And there's one part actually that's really nice where, she's taking people out of the forests and saving them. And then there's this one old man who, like, she says, "Do you want to come out?" And he's like, "No, I don't." And he fades into the
A
dream.
dream, like she leads him into it, and he happily stays.
Because I took it to be he had cancer because he talks about a pain in his stomach that wouldn't go away. But then his sons are like, "Well, he was never really the same after mom died. So maybe it was grief they were talking about."
I think it was grief, though at first I did think of it as a sickness that had plagued him for years. Because what it is this tree is right at the gate of Zatochek. And so it's literally like in the middle of a place where people live, and people are real creeped out. And Agnieszka literally has to be like, "That's your dad now, guys. He's in that tree. Don't cut it down." And they look at it because they were like, "Why wouldn't he?" They all came out because it was like the dad and like two of his sons in the tree, and they came out, but he wouldn't. And then they were like, he missed mom. He's going to stay dead. She has a hard time explaining to people that the people they love are still in these trees. But it's interesting watching it work. And she's been like making friends with the walkers by giving them non-tainted fruit, and then they lead her to tainted trees, and she either saves them or burns them down.
She's really like growing into herself. People around the village know her, or the villages know her because she's introducing herself and making a point of being like,
Friendly and connected.
you get the sense she's going to become the valley witch, and like it's really nice because it's nice seeing her grow into.
And she's like this barefoot, like she's still dirty, but she's barefoot, and she's really come into her own. She eats the fruit from the trees, and she even says at one point that every time she eats the fruit, it's a question is being asked of her, and one day in the far future she might answer yes, which is to make herself part of the dream of the trees. And it's just so, the end of this book has so many comfy feelings because she's just this happy little barefoot witch doing her thing around town and having her little rituals to her days. She leaves fruit out for the walkers, and it's just so cozy and beautiful.
And you hear from the capital that Kasia's gonna stay there because the king, the little crown prince, like wants her to stay, and he feels very strongly about it. So, and I thought that was really cute, the relationship she had with the two of them,
He made her the captain of his guard.
because she can't be beat.
And so she's learning how to actually fight with a sword now instead of just being like invulnerable. And then it's funny because he decides he's going to marry this one princess that actually is like a good match, but he decided it because the princess could spit really far.
Yeah. It's like, it's such a cute little moment. And then we get to the most cute moment. And this is how the book actually ends. And this scene like just made my shipper heart.
Can I read it? It's really short.
What happens is Agnieszka is she's eating with her family, and they've just had like a really nice little harvest festival type thing, and her mother is braiding her hair.
And at this point, she's given up thinking that he's going to come back. But then he appears. Sarkin was standing at the opening of the circle, one hand perched on the table nearest him, firelight leaping to pick out his silver rings and fine silver buttons. He looked grander than the king's ballroom and perfectly improbable. All of us were staring at him, me included, his mouth thinned with what I would have called displeasure once, but now named prickly mortification. And that's such a beautiful moment because you realize she can now read his emotions. And it wasn't always that he was angry, but that he himself was mortified and frustrated and just didn't know how to deal with it. I climbed to my feet and went to him, licking my thumb clean. He darted a look at the uncovered basket behind me and saw what I was eating and glared at me. That's appalling, he said. They're wonderful, I said. They're all coming ripe. All the better to turn you into a tree, he said. I don't want to be a tree yet, I said. Happiness was bubbling up through me, a bright stream laughing. He'd come back. When did you arrive? This afternoon, he said stiffly. I came to receive the taxes, of course. Of course, I said. I was sure he'd even gone to Olshanka for the tribute first, just so he could pretend that was the truth for a little bit longer. But I couldn't really bring myself to pretend with him, not even long enough for him to get used to the idea. My mouth was already turning up at the corners without me willing it to. He flushed and looked away. But that wasn't any better for him since everyone else was watching us with enormous interest, too drunk on beer and dancing to be polite. He looked back at me instead and scowled at my smile. Come and meet my mother, I said, and I reached out and took his hand. It's so good. And so something that has happened regularly is that he never, ever integrated himself with the people in the valley. Again, to keep himself separate so he wouldn't develop roots into the valley. And so he's never come to the harvest festivals before. He would always just get his taxes and tributes delivered directly to the castle. But he's here now, and it's him saying, I'm willing to put roots down here with you. And it's just so fucking sweet. And that's just where it ends. And my shipper heart is like, no, I want to see them as a couple. I want to see him awkwardly meeting her parents and learning how to do.
It's such a great ending just to have her take his hand, and now she knows that like this is what he's about, and she's like, and he's gonna pretend, but like she sees through it. No, it was so cute. I like, this is what I'm talking about when I talk about, like, notice there's no fever touch in that whole description, and yet me and Maria are squeeing over it like crazy, because it is like when she takes his hand, and like it's just when authors hold back on the romance a little bit and actually build the relationship organically, it can be so effective.
There's a couple of points where they have moments, but a huge chunk of the book, they're not even in the same area. And there are moments where she doesn't realize she misses him. There was a point earlier in the book where she's looking amongst the stacks and she's looking for a book, and Father Ballo comes up and goes, what are you looking for? And she answers without thinking and goes, I'm looking for the dragon. And she realizes, oh, she's looking for a spell to contact him because she wants to talk to him. She needs his presence, the familiarity as she's working through these problems. She wants some of his advice. And it's just such a beautiful, and it's, Will talked about it in Persuasion, where the romance is built through the absence of it. Like in the absence of the other person. And it's just so well done here. And it's like the romance is a tiny ass portion of this book. You'll notice we did not spend a lot of time talking about it.
But it's so good. I mean, I even forgive him for not being an actual dragon. That's how good it is, guys.
He's so grumpy. I love him. It's great. I love this book. There are so many things it does well. Prince Marek can be used as a masterclass of how to have a complicated gray person. I also think he could be used as a really good example of how someone with best wishes makes terrible decisions that could turn them into a villain. He's never actually a villain in this, but you could use his how he
Yeah.
progresses as an example of how to take a good person who thinks they're being good and ends up a villain.
Without having a viper serpent inside of her asking her to eat people.
Yes,
A
exactly.
la Forest of a Thousand
Horizons of a Thousand
Lanterns.
Winters. Yeah. There's so many things that are done well. There's tiny bit characters like Alyosha. I want to know her story. We didn't have time to go into her, but like fantastic. Father Paolo, there's also a tiny line about how he didn't even know he was a wizard until 40 years went by and people noticed he didn't age.
Yeah, he was just a monk.
There's just these fantastic little moments, and it's so good. Like, I know this one wasn't as analytical as we normally do, but it was just good.
The thing about Novik is she's just such a talented writer in these small little ways on top of the big ways that it separates her from the pack just a lot. She's a great writer, guys. If you like the basic premise of this book, I would go read it. It's very much what it says on the cover.
Also, it's amazing that it's a one shot. How rare is that? How many books have we read
Yeah.
that have been one shot?
Spinning Silver, and that was it. Have you guys read the book? Did you guys like it? Have you read other Naomi Novik? Do you want to watch any of the videos, or maybe this side, of that we've done exploring her work? Are there other books of this type you liked?
Or that you can recommend?
We appreciate you guys. Let us know what you think.
We love you, our parasocial darlings. Good night.
And then she took his hand.
So good. So